intriguing. You would always find them coming across, and you would always see what is this. Shriyas, can we go to the next slide, please? Right. So there's a concept called previous year. Okay. So in the tax law, previous year and assessment year are one of the most important words or terms that you would always come across. So previous year is the year in which you will earn the income, you will earn, you will do all the transaction. So all the year in which you do all the transaction is called previous year, and the year in which you assess your tax and then you pay tax to the government, that is called as assessment year. The government will always say for this assessment year, this is the tax. So you would always have to look back and see now what is the now what was the transaction that has happened in the previous year. So all the transaction that has happened in the previous year, you will have to apply the tax rate that it says for the assessment year, relevant assessment year. So for example, let me take an example. Now, if I say assessment year 2020-21, right now we are in assessment year 2020-21. So it's from April 1st, 2020 to April 31st, April 2021. So any law, any tax rate that is applicable for assessment year 2020-21, you will have to apply that to the transaction which has just happened in financial year 2019-2020. So the financial year 2019-2020, you will have to apply the tax rate which is applicable for assessment year 2020-21. So you will have to apply the law in the assessment year and apply the law to the transaction which has happened in the previous year. So assessment year is our primary focus. When are we looking at the law? When are we applying of the law has to happen immediately after the year in which you have earned the income or you have done all the transaction. So these are two aspects that is very, very important. It is not that easy to immediately understand this. I know any amount of enumeration right now, which I'm doing theoretically, might not really help unless you go and see practically. But this is something that you have to always remember. Previous year is the year in which you earn and you have done the transaction. Assessment year is the year in which you pay the tax and you apply the law. So you apply the law in terms of computation, but actually it is applying to the previous year. Right? So who is an SSC? SSC under the Income Tax Act is the person who is liable to pay tax. So if I'm liable to pay tax, I'm the SSC. Somebody else is liable to pay tax, he is the SSC. So business is liable to pay tax, business is the SSC. Similarly, there can be charitable institutions which are liable or might not be liable to tax. They are the SSC. So SSC has to be seen in that context. So let's look at a very important concept. So how do you determine what is how and on what basis you tax your subjects? So there are two aspects. It's a generally recognized world over, it's a global concept, and it involves two rules for you to tax your subject. That is the source rule. So what India says that whatever source of income to anybody, like whatever the source of income which is in India arising to anybody across the globe, I will be able to tax it. So why I say source rule, that if there is a source which is arising in India, there is a source of income. Suppose you have a property in India, you sell the property in India, and you will have to then pay tax in India. Why? It is because first, the subject of tax is in India, the property. Second, that you would use the infrastructure in India. You have always used the infrastructure in India, the land in India, to build that building or a property. And now you want to sell that property. Definitely, India needs a right to charge tax on that property. So India says if a source of an income is in India, we would tax. Every country in the world says this. If a source is in that country, we will tax. Now, similarly, let's go back to residence rule. So when it's a residence rule, they say if I'm a resident of, if a person is a resident of my country, I'll have the right to tax. I'll tax them irrespective of whatever happens, wherever they earn the income. Because he's a tax resident of my country, I will tax that person in India. So there are a lot of rules regarding residency, when the residency happens, when the residency is acquired in India. So residency is separate from citizenship. Don't mix both of them. Citizenship is under Citizenship Act. Residency is purely under Income Tax Act. Both are very, very different. Okay, so what is hypothetical income? So income which is not really accruing to anybody. You cannot tax that under the Income Tax Act. You have to always tax what is there. What is the real income? So see, unless and until I earn certain income, it cannot be, I cannot be burdened with the tax. So I have to earn certain income, and that earning has to be in real terms, that I have actually earned certain income. Now you can tax me. For example, say there are a lot of norms of for the banks. Now suppose banks recognize their income on their loans. Now loans, there are loans which are not paid. There are loans where there are a lot of defaults. So bank has certain provisioning norms. So bank RBI says you will not recognize any income on a loan which is not paying you beyond 90 days. You would say, boss, this loan is not paying. How can I recognize income? How can I say, okay, he will pay me the money, the amount is due? So the court said that, okay, as per the accounting principle, you might have to take this as income, but there is no real income that is accruing to you. So therefore, we cannot charge tax on such income. So what you have to see is a real income and not hypothetical or notional income. You can refer to these case laws to understand the concept better. In case you have any issues, you can definitely get back to me. Okay, so another thing which is very common is that tomorrow you go to a firm and say, or any practitioner, he will say, look at the, can you get me the tax rate for certain assessment year? What you will immediately do, you will go and look at the Income Tax Act, you will scan through the Income Tax Act and you would not find a single rate. So the rates of tax is never contained in the Income Tax Act. It's always given in the Finance Act. So Finance Act is separate from Income Tax Act. Finance Act is like it is rolled out every year. There's a budget and there's a finance bill which enumerate all the matters that is given in the budget, and then and then the tax rate which is given in the budget that is taken in finance bill. Finance bill is passed, it becomes a Finance Act, and then Finance Act is used for all the tax rate purposes. So you will always have to look back at the Finance Act to know what is the actual amount, actual rate that has to be applied in case of any income. So if we can move on to the next. So let's look at GST scenario. So under GST, I have actually listed out what are the essential feature. Basically, what I've already talked about. If we want to go further into detail, then either under Income Tax Act and GST, I'm just not even scratching the surface. There's a lot to look at in the substantive part. So I think I would skip on that. You can read these portion. You will have to actually look at the law to understand the substantive law part. So I'll move on to other things, which I think is more important from the practice side. So this was, I think I would restrict my enumeration on the substantive part to this. Let's move on to the practice side quickly so that we can finish in time as well. So if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so what we can do in practice. So where does the practice of Income Tax Act start? So there are various levels of practice. So first is that, like we saw, what is an assessment? Assessment is where where the department verifies what is the declaration that you have given, whether the income that you have already reported is correct, etc., etc. So this involves a very long drawn, very lengthy process, and the government literally goes into a lot of details of what is the transaction that you have done, how you have reported a certain transaction, whether that is appropriate, whether there was more tax which was to be paid. So that's a detailed examination of your books and books of accounts, your documents, etc. So this is the assessment level. So assessment level can give you a lot of so this is done usually by initial practitioners. So it's comparatively considered as easy, but in real terms, if you ask, it is very, very difficult to get through the assessment. And once you have gone wrong in the assessment stage, then the appellate proceeding and everything will follow. So assessment, if it goes correct, and if you are able to convince the assessing officer that what you have done is correct, there is no question of any and the appellate proceedings start and things just go out of your control. So assessment is very, very important. Lawyers, of course, are authorized to appear in assessment. Even CAs are. So assessment stage, people usually prefer chartered accountants because it involves a lot of book account, book verification, etc., etc. So it's usually with chartered accountant, but lawyers can definitely appear. And the assessing officers are usually IRS officers. So you will have to deal with a lot of IRS officers. It's very difficult and very different knack to deal with IRS officers per se. So that has to be that you would develop over time once you start meeting them. The way they ask you a lot of questions, it is at times very difficult to answer. Right? So then once the assessment is over, now suppose you have a demand, you are aggrieved. You would go into appellate proceedings. So there are various appellate proceedings that is given under Income Tax Act. So first is with the dispute resolution panel. This is for a very limited cases. This is not available for everyone. This is for a foreign company or a company where there is a very special adjustment called transfer pricing adjustment. I'm not getting into what transfer pricing is. It's a very detailed concept for many number of sessions. So not getting into transfer pricing, it's a very limited application concept. And there's a panel of commissioners. Then you can present your case. It's just like you are aggrieved and you want to tell them, boss, this is not what it is, and the order of the assessing officer is wrong. So that is one. Like we have appellate proceedings in district court because you have started with uh, say district court, then you go to high court, then you go to Supreme Court. Similar is the case here. So, but here the good point is you have a lot of forum in between. So it's not just district court and then you move on to high court. So first you look at the assessment, then you look at the commissioner appeal. That's a first level appellate authority. It is within the department. The commissioner is of the department, but he will look at your question of fact as well as question of law. So like we see in district courts, you can always speak on question of fact and question of law. But when you go to high court, they might entertain only the first appeal or second appeal. The second appeal is always the question of law. They don't look at question of fact. So similar is the case here. The first appeal looks at question of fact, question of law. Even the second appeal looks at question of fact, question of law. That's with Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. That's the most um, that's a forum which is attracting most number of talent right now because it has huge amount of cases piled up, and it's a very, very good opportunity because the adjudicating members are chartered accountants as well as lawyers. It's a combination always. It's very rare, and for a very small case, there is a single member bench. Usually, it's a combination of both. So you will see a lawyer and a CH sitting together adjudicating your matter. So they are experts in their field, of course, and they are selected through a rigorous screening process, and then they adjudicate your matter. This is Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. So here, the question of fact and question of law both can be argued. And believe me, the appellate matters actually depends on what you do at commissioner appeal level and also tribunal level, because once your facts are settled, and if you lose out on any of the fact, it is very difficult to find support in the law. It gets extremely difficult. So you have to establish your facts very, very clearly in these forum, either at CIT appeal and ITAT, both these level. Then you go to high court. There only substantial question of law can be raised. Then you go to Supreme Court, where by way of either say civil appeal or SLP, you can go to you can appeal against the High Court's order. In addition to all of these, you would always find in the High Court there are a lot of writ petition. So all of us know Article 226. So if there is any violation of legal right, you can approach a court under seeking any writ. So similar is the case that whenever, say, for example, you ask for a stay of demand. So there's a demand raised against you. You go to the department, you go to the officer, or you go to the appellate tribunal. Appellate tribunal can give you stay, or officer can give you stay. You ask for a stay of demand, they deny. You think that you have a fit case for stay of demand, but the authority is denying you. You can always approach the High Court by way of a writ petition, say that, look, sir, I had this case. My case is this. I fulfill all the condition which is required for staying of a demand. That is prima facie case, balance of convenience, and irreparable loss. So I have to show all three conditions. I'm able to show all of that, but I've still not got the stay of demand. So for all of those reasons, there are writ petitions. So writ petition give a lot of basically it gives you a lot of opportunity to appear in high court. So it will give you a lot of high court practice. So most of high court practice is not just appellate side, it's usually writ petition. So writ petition comes up quite often, and they are disposed of at times quite fast, because otherwise it becomes infructuous. For example, if I don't get a stay for many hearings, usually stay is one hearing matter. If I get a stay or I don't get a stay, so these kind of matter, they also get disposed of quite fast, but they keep coming. So if there is a notice which is issued to you, you think it is not appropriate, it is against the law, you can always go back and reach the High Court, say this notice is illegal, sir, I want this to be quashed. Similar, now you go to Supreme Court after whatever order, either against any writ petition that you filed, you now go again, you file SLP before Supreme Court, or any appellate order, you can go to Supreme Court. So these are very important areas where lawyers can really improve their practice, and they can have a very, very good flourishing practice here. Believe me, in income tax, like I've always been telling when I was in the college, that in income tax, there are very, very less number of lawyers, and a lot of talent is required, and a lot of matters are coming up. There are a lot of piling up, and there are not enough lawyers. So it gives you a lot of opportunity, no doubt. But the practice of income tax law, or any tax law for that matter, needs a lot of patience, because you won't get your case immediately, since the matters involve a lot of financial implication, representation. So there's a lot of forum within, say, Income Tax Act itself. So you can go before advance. Appear for the person. So all of these gives you a lot of scope and opportunity. This is much more than any other branch of law, any other field of law, for the reason that you can see it's page full of representation opportunities. You would never get it in civil law, you would never get it in criminal law, but you have a lot of opportunity under income tax. Similar is the position under GST. I have not written separately. There also all these forum, all these authorities do exist. There also you have a very, very large scope for undertaking your practice, right? So let's move to the next slide, please. So under international tax, there are a few concepts. I think I would not get into this right now, because the concept, these would take a long time. So let's move to the next, please. If you have any query regarding this, we can talk later. Let's move to the next. So yeah, let us understand, this is something that all of us need. So suppose we are put in a income tax case. So you go to a firm tomorrow, say by way of internship, or you join somewhere and you are given a lot of assignments on income tax. So now from here on, we would look at the general practice perspective. So what we as lawyer would require to equip ourselves. So I've listed out the commentaries. So these are famous commentaries on income tax. So if you are put in a situation where you have to research or where you have to deal with income tax problem, you can always get back to these commentaries. These are really, really helpful. Some of them run into 10 or 12 huge volumes. So the page number would go much more than 25,000 put together. And you also have this Kanga and Palkhiwala Law and Practice of Income Tax that I've written. It's just in 2 volumes, but it will give you a very brief thing. Okay, so this is what uh, these are the important commentaries. So for GST, I don't think there's any fixed authoritative commentary that has come up yet. Like not to my knowledge. So I'm not also the right person to comment on that. So let's look at the journals. There are a lot of journals. Like we have SEC, like we have AIR. Just for income tax, you would have these 6 or 7 type of journal which are quite famous. Income tax report, it is the most preferred journal. So if you are practicing income tax, you must read this very regularly. Then current tax report, taxman, all of these are quite important. Now with the GST, you have this GST Law Times. So GST Reporter, this is now the most important journal in the indirect tax practice. Then you have this is excise law times. I beg your pardon here. This is economic law times I've written. This is excise law times. Please correct it. Or I'll correct it. I'll correct and I'll send it to you. Then we have service tax reporter. Now it is no longer relevant unless you have some old cases pending with you. If you can move on to the next, please. Yeah. So now let's look at some of the qualities that we need to become good lawyers, tax lawyers specifically. So you have to have first, you have to read very regularly, because what is peculiar to taxation is that you have very regular circulars, notification coming up on a daily basis. Okay, either if you're doing direct and indirect tax, both, you are very likely to go mad. But if you're doing just one of these, then it's still manageable. But you keep on getting regular updates, regular uh, like you keep on getting regular updates, and you have to keep up with all of those changes, because if you are looking at any transaction, any issue, you must apply the law, the notification that has come, the circular that has been issued. All of that are mandatory. You have to have a hold of all of them. Then you have to understand accounting aspects. So what I would suggest, see, everybody dreads tax for this reason, that we don't know accounts. How would we able to understand tax? Believe me, that's not the case. I have seen a lot of professional, including my own senior, who is not a chartered accountant, who has not done any chartered accountancy related course, but he is able to understand with practice. So what you can do, instead of doing a wholesale course like CA, CS. But even if you listen to Mr. Datar, he would always say, if you want to get into tax practice, do some part of all of these courses, say if intermediate level. Just do to that extent. You don't even need to pass, but at least learn the concept. So when you are put to a test, when you have an exam, you would study much more sincerely. That's the reason probably you would have said just attempt the exams or just read for those courses. So that is a structured way of reading. But this would help you understand. This would help you basically take up your knowledge and your ability to appreciate income tax law in a much better way. But believe me, after like since 1 year of being in income tax practice, I do not see that majority of the matter do not really involve very um, peculiar of intrinsic accounting aspects in it. That is not the case. You usually have law. So that's one thing that you can always consider, but you must have some ability to understand accounting aspects. So you can do these. You can also watch videos. So since I've mentioned a few more advice that I have got from my seniors, that you read one case law every day, and then you can also read, also listen to a lot of videos, watch a lot of videos on accountancy, on tax laws by expert. I've written down the uh, professional that you can actually look for, that you can actually listen on YouTube. and these would give you a lot of good insights on and the thought process which involves in a tax matter. So you have to also look at like you have to regularly look at the website of CBDT, CBIC, what happens there, and then you can prepare a library of your own, whatever material that you're reading. Just keep that with you for future references. And then there are a lot of policy documents. There are in foreign organization or international organization that deal with income tax matters. So income tax related policy issues, etc. Like OECD I mentioned. So you will find a lot of documents and commentaries that they have issued on international tax issues. You can read them as well. There's one website that I have suggested here, ITAT Online. So if you go to this website, they give a free subscription. Basically, you can subscribe to their mail, and then you would always would keep getting case law on a regular basis. So this would be a good source for you to get case law so that which you can read. Okay? So right. So now, if you so since I have to finish, I'll quickly take you through the next point. Can we go to the next one, please? Yeah. So what do you do in tax internship? What I have done myself is that I've basically been listening to people. So that's very, very important that you listen to people. And then there are a lot of terms that is involved in tax matters. So you have to understand those terms. If you are able to master those terms, tax law is very, very easy. So these terms make things very complex, right? So whenever you do a research, what you can do is that you can always do the background research. So I've given an example here. So it's a question of subsidy, whether subsidy will be taxable or not taxable. So why? Because it's a revenue capital. So you can read on what is revenue receipt, what is capital receipt. So just go to the background of why such a issue is even arising, why that is even debatable, right? So you can then regularly discuss with your seniors, and then you can summarize all that judgment that you're reading. Always try and summarize, because it has a lot of facts. Any judgment in tax law has a lot of facts. It's very important to summarize those facts and understand, because unless and until you do that, it will be very difficult for you to understand what they really want to say. Okay. So in addition to this, another thing that I want to tell you is that the website of income tax india.gov.in and the CBIC website are really, really good. It will give you an insight on, say, tax rate if you want to reach. There are tax tools which will actually compute the tax rate for you and give it to you. There are absolutely a large number of benefits that you can have from those websites. So that can be done. So you can reach out to those websites whenever you are in trouble. I'm sure these websites have some or the other answer. So whenever you need something, definitely reach out to these websites, and these websites would give you a lot of basically a lot of information, right? So I'll just tell on the two things more. On the remuneration part, what is the general remuneration for lawyers and taxation? I think it's no very different. It's not very different from any other field. It depends on where you join, how you go about the practice. If you join chamber practice, of course, it would be governed by the chamber's rules. If you join a firm, it's based on firm policy. But if you wait for a longer time, the benefits in tax law, I feel, is much higher than you have in any other field. You can take the example of Mr. Datar, Mr. Salve, all of them started with tax practice. You can also take the example of Mr. Palkhiwala. He himself was first a tax practitioner. He started with a lot of tax matter, and then he moved on to the next. So the benefit with tax practitioner in ITAT level, etc., or even department, if not in High Court, Supreme Court, the benefit is that ITAT function only for half a day. So first half, ITAT doesn't function in the second half. So in the second half, you are free to get into any other practice. You can have matters in High Court, you can have matters in some other tribunal. So what for Nani Palkhiwala, what helped was that he had labor matters and labor tribunal would sit in the afternoon. So that's the usual example that you would always get. So with some part of tax practice, you have this benefit that you can take up other practice as well. You can always look at more and more of other options so that your earning is somewhat balanced. right? Another thing is on the law firms and senior advocates. Right now, there are a lot of senior advocates. In Delhi, you would have Mr. Ajay Vora, who is quite good, very, very good for them. Like, I'm not even eligible to say, but they're quite good. So, Mr. Ajay Vora, and you have Mr. Venkatraman coming and practicing here. I'll tell mostly for Bombay, so a lot of you are from Bombay side. So in Bombay, you would have Mr. Poras Kaka, Mr. Percy Padiwala. They're really good senior advocates. You have Dr. Shivaram, excellent senior advocate. And these people are essentially practicing in tax law. So you can reach out to them. Maybe you can try an internship there and then try and understand, work with them, and then understand the tax law much, much more better. Right. So these are the senior advocates. Some of the firm are that for indirect tax, it is Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan, hands down. Nothing bigger than Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan. For direct tax practice, you have a lot of firms like Vash Associates. You have, like, to name my own firm, it's DMD. So they are also now growing. And you would have right. So we may open the floor for question. I'm just saying the general things, and we can reach out to the last slide on the screen. So so the one that Vivek is organizing. So I think we will take questions from there first, because on the other one, what Shears is hosting, that doesn't have a time constraint, right? So we can take question from Vivek's hosting. What he is hosting, we'll take questions from there, right? So I think there are already a few questions that I'll directly take up. Scope of Kunal has asked scope of litigation in indirect tax post GST enactment. Of course, there are the issues in GST is not very less. There are still a lot of issues that has come up in GST. There are a lot of constitutional issue that is there. So constitutional problem, constitutional issues are still there in GST. More than 200 writ petition in GST, if you can look at the numbers, right? And then Siddharth is asking, if you okay, if you give salaries to an employee, you can claim 80G. 80G, if Kerala government is saying, it is not correct, because no state government can say or give any benefit under the Central Act, which is Income Tax Act. 80G is a provision under Income Tax Act, and it is for donation. Whenever you make a donation, you would get a benefit under Section 80G. So that won't apply. So I don't really think this is a credible information, Siddharth. But 80G benefit, if you are giving to the PM Cares Fund, etc., that of course is there. Yeah. So Jay's question is very pertinent. Jay, what happens is that you always look at like uh, for lawyers. If you are in a law firm, tax law firms, there are a lot of writ petition, there are a lot of legal reasoning that goes about. You can always impress them with your interpretation. So what CAs are good at is to understand the business, but what lawyers are good at is the interpretation part. So a tax law firm which is doing core law, but in tax field, would always need your interpretational skills, and that would be really, really important. So you can try and improve on that, right? So read on interpretation, read on various material, and it's not very difficult to understand what CAs are able to understand. Even that is law, even that is logic. So don't worry, if you keep on reading, you would ultimately understand. Okay, if we look at OECD approach, see OECD is basically an organization for cooperation and economic development. So it's a international organization where there are not a lot of members. There's got very few number of countries as its member. Now, what happens is that OECD and the way OECD works, the OECD guidelines are, they are preferable for developed countries. They are not still good for developing countries. So that is the reason why India has still not become part of OECD. But India, what you can do, you can write down all the questions, send it to me separately. You can mark it to Vivek. I'll get that and I'll write the answer and send it back to you. Yeah, just give with your email ID. Just send it to Vivek. I'll answer them back to you because the Zoom meeting might just end. Or if you want the meeting to be session, like we can host it again. I have no problem. Yeah, those who have any question, you can join again. In the meanwhile, I'll start answering the question on the other chat, please.